Thank you. That was a very British conclusion, wasn't it? Commonsensical. We have to remedy these ills. I think it is amazing how this impressive Westminster democracy has unraveled in short time. And this really shows us how even the most, in a way, favorable models we have suddenly do not function. And governments that are not responsive to Parliament, government ministers that vote against their own government, people who are continuously dissatisfied, etc., etc. So this is, and I would say, in a way, one could say this is an amazing amount of rule breaking in a short time. And William Golding says in Lord of the Flies, Ralph says, you're breaking the rules. And the answer is, yes, that's so serious because we've only got the rules. That's all we've got. And that's even more true in international affairs. But in a way, the power situation must lead to an outcome that has a majority in Parliament and which is permissible in Brussels. I mean, this is the gravity, the law of gravity, political law of gravity. So one can say that, in a way, there will be a rule that will apply, namely the majority rule. But it has been 3 years of confusion. Perhaps one could say that what happened was that nobody thought the outcome of the referendum would be a no, and therefore had not planned for it. That's the best, sort of most benign interpretation. But I think this illustrates how quickly things can go very, very badly. And there is also a parallel to today's France, where you have the streets dictating the government, and the party structure is, in a way, abolished. The two major democracies next to the Germany is the only one left without a big crisis.
Those are very helpful comments because, in a way, maybe I could express it like this. Historically, when I would visit the House of Commons, it was a sense of excitement to visit and participate, cross-examine in an inquiry or give evidence or some such thing. Now, I think there is a fear that is very real. I want to make you aware of just how it is to be an MP in Parliament at the moment. Their accounts, the electronic accounts they get, are obviously vandalized with, different threats against them. They get threats every day. Most policemen will be aware of individual members of the House of Commons having to be given police protection because of the problems that have been faced. So it's not as if we have moved from a talking shop that has fallen out with the neighbours. It's more to a visceral sense of, you put it very nicely, the French model is frightening because it's a form of street popularity. But this is much more insidious because it's not so obvious. Life goes on. You get that sense. The trains sometimes run, they don't, but you know what I mean. There's a normality. But beneath that, there is real fear. And having had the privilege of working with some members of both the Commons and the Lords, I really do think that someone has to make an apologia pro vita sua for them. They are not to blame, as you rightly say. There has to be a democratic majority that brings us forward. But we have to accept that to move on. And I think that's where the conscience that was mentioned by Cardinal Casper at the beginning of our discussion is so relevant, because what's needed is for people to draw back and respect each other in a way that I think is very hard to get at the moment. So thank you for your comment. It's very helpful.
Thank you, John. Congratulations for your brilliant presentation. Now, a few months before the referendum in Great Britain, Windsor Hotel, there was a castle, Windsor Castle, there was a seminar to which I was invited. It was organized by my former tutor while I was in Oxford, and then he became president of Europe Goldman Sachs. So a banker, and he's very influential. He belongs to the Anglican Church, etc. So in that occasion, I was struck by the fact that he and all his friends said, we are in favor of Brexit. So I said, how is it possible? And first of all, he said to me, don't believe to those people who say that the pro-Brexit are not the elite, because we belong to elite, and we vote. I said, why is that so? Because he said, what people do not understand in Europe is the structure. They talk about the rhetoric. For instance, the British are unhappy about Brussels bureaucracy, which is even true, but one country cannot separate because of that. That is ridiculous. The problem, he said, is because the institutional economic setup of the European Union are self-contradictory and will not be conducive to anywhere. Because, as we know, institutions are not only political, but even economic. He was referring to the economic. In particular, three. The corporate law, which there is, as you know, as a professor of law, there is a big debate between America and Europe. Second, competition law, the antitrust law. Continental Europe interprets antitrust in a totally different way from the Anglo-Saxon, England plus United States. Third, fourth industrial revolution. They said, look, the Europeans are not on the proper track to understand that the novelties of the fourth industrial revolution, in particular artificial intelligence and digitalization. And so we tried in the past years to convince, in particular our colleagues from France, Germany, even Italy and Spain, but they do not understand. And we believe they are wrong. And so we will make a pact with the United States and we go on our own. What happened? That Trump won the election and Trump changed altogether. And so these people nowadays are in the middle of nowhere. But the original project had, of course, I was not in agreement. I tried to contest on economic grounds, but that is not the proper place. But we have to consider that at the beginning, they had a point. And at this point was based on, since after all, Great Britain, the market economy started during the Industrial Revolution, 18th century, so nobody can blame English people not know the market game. They said the Europeans will sooner or later will be superseded by Americans and by China and Russia. And so we do not want, since we are British, we had better stay with the Americans because Americans are our cousins, blah, 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 etc., etc. How do you react to this consideration? Perhaps you know the man who told me.
No,
you know him.
I like the points you make because of the clarity and the reasoning employed. So my response is that I would add to it various things about the structures of the European Parliament, the question about what does the Court of Justice do when it makes decisions and how competent is it to actually deal with some of the policy issues in each of the states and so on. A wider point, which is the disparity between the wealth that is accumulated, particularly after the 2008 financial crisis. But all these debates and discussions are at a level where the outcome can be a conjoined pattern of reform or debate, which would take us forward in a discussion that would then perhaps improve the European Union. The sad thing is that that is not what the debate has been about in the UK. The debate, I think, has been about what I have actually dealt with in my paper, which is the notion that effectively England is the superior part of the United Kingdom, and therefore if it is decided, as it has, to leave, then the others must follow. And that notion has been, as it were, legitimized by the fact that people, real votes yesterday, voted in the north of England against traditional voting patterns. And that brings me neatly, I think, to the point that you're raising, which is how do political parties respond to your point? And that is where I think you've very astutely picked up the weakness. They have been bad at understanding the issue, let alone producing the policies. And, okay, I am an academic. I am as to blame as anyone else in not explaining this. But I consciously do think that we as Europeans owe to ourselves a better valuation of what the project is, with all its faults, so the outcome can be better for us all, as well as for the issues that our colleagues discussed this morning, China, as eloquently put, and yesterday from the Russian representative. All that we have to do. What's happened is sound bites have replaced erudite analysis and reasoned discussion, and that's the worrying fact. So that's my response. Thank you.
We listened to papers on Catalonia and then on Great Britain, and my impression was that concerning the position of the European institutions, in the case of Catalonia, there was argument that if Catalonia separates, will never be accepted as a member state. In the case of Great Britain, there's opposite argument. Once Britain leaves, we will accept Scotland as a new member state. And this is a kind of double talk, which, in my understanding, doesn't facilitate this decision-making process.
Sorry. Not only, Father, do I agree with you, but I don't know if you know, but Nicola Sturgeon wrote specifically after the referendum to the European Commission, Jean-Paul Bunter and all the rest of them, they discussed it, and she was told very clearly that it was not possible for her, Scotland, to be part of the European Union on its own, and similarly Northern Ireland. Now, I think that's the right answer, but I'm conscious of another point which emerges from this morning, which is the question about the future of the European Union. If there is fragmentation, and the fragmentation is based on legitimate reasons, legitimate in the sense that subjectively people feel disconnected and economically disempowered, either those issues are addressed or we go back to the architectural model to find some form of accommodation. And I like the thoughts that were being produced earlier in the discussions about how this might be done. It's an engaging discussion, but we need to do it because at the heart of it all might be a violent reaction against what it is we stand for. And that is something that I think we have to be aware of. So I agree with your comments. I think they're accurate, and I think you've represented very well. And I think that in the case of Scotland, they know fully well that they won't get in on their own. And you're quite right, it's quite dangerous because it produces a false expectation, which is as bad as a lie. Thank you.
Yeah, very short. Thank you so much, John, for the exceedingly clear, precise, and sobering reflection. I want to go back to Professor Samani's question. Let me frame it slightly different. The movement from bigamy to monogamy, divorcing the European Union and the reclaiming of the affection for the special relation with Washington. Could you comment on the role of the special relation in the context of the denouement?
You know, you asked a question which the American president, he then was the American president, Bill Clinton, came to the University of Warwick, and I asked him a question. I said, Mr. President, do you have a special relationship with the United Kingdom? And if the answer is yes, does the United States of America have a special relationship with the United Kingdom? And that, I think, was an important question, because it's exactly what you're asking. If you look at the diplomacy on this, it is made up of a bilateral sense of agreement that goes back many years. Churchill fostered it, and the Americans consented to it. But it is not the same as what it is we have in the European Union. Let us be clear. And unless by some miracle the United States wants to join the European Union, we're stuck with what we have. I think it's dangerous to think that there's a special relationship when there is none. There does not seem to be any suggestion that WTO rules will somehow be manipulated or changed because Britain is a supplicant to the United States. as someone put it, it's either American chicken or nothing, to put it bluntly. So I'm skeptical for the reasons I've given you. Thank you for the question.